Hi there, friends. I'm Dana Shea, and you are watching Real Relationship Talk. Thank you so much for joining in. If you haven't yet seen part 1 of my conversation with Dr. Jessica McCleese, I want to encourage you to go to wherever you found this video and watch part 1, because part 1 really lays the foundation for what we're going to continue to talk about in this part 2 video. So I'm really excited to announce to you all that today we're going to have conversations about intimacy. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what my understanding of intimacy was as a child, and hopefully you are going to gain a lot of knowledge and insight and understanding that will help you or maybe someone you know in your relationships. So let's join in on the conversation.
We really had these expectations of our wedding night, just, fireworks going off and, just complete oneness and just this great intimate, night. Unfortunately, it was anything but that.
It was just awful. I mean, I was a nervous wreck. I didn't feel pursued by him. I didn't feel a connection. I felt this distance, and it just was a very vulnerable, uncomfortable scenario.
And that really set the tone for the next 2.5 to 3 years.
It just continued, and it just seemed to get worse, and there was just no pursuit, no desire. I mean, I used to make jokes I could run through the house naked, and he'd be like, move out of the way, that's really how it kind of felt. It just felt completely invisible.
She couldn't figure out why her husband didn't desire her. Am I not attracted to my wife?
Just felt just hyper-focused on my looks. Like I wasn't pretty enough, that if I just looked different, if I wore different clothes, if, I had a facelift, or, just if he likes brunette. I would say he likes brunettes, he doesn't like blondes. If I was tanner, maybe he likes, Spanish women. I would just try to think of any reason, why it couldn't be me. And I just felt desperate, to know something, to understand something. It was insanity.
And of course, I started getting defensive, and it just drove a wedge in between us even more. But she started to look around the house, and it all came to a head at that point.
When I found the pornography, I felt, what was the most devastating part to me is because I had spent so many times crying to him and telling him, this is, made me cry, but anyway, it's just that this was not how just heartbroken I was, and how I wanted to make it right, and I wanted to be connected. And he would just look at me like, I don't understand, what are you talking about?
When we were dating, the pornography was a very big part of my life, and I justified that by remaining pure with Kelly.
Just from my old perception of pornography, and just what was the message I got growing up, is that one woman was never enough. And I just felt like, I never can meet the standard,
And for the first 3 years of our marriage, I had convinced her that there was no sex drive, that it was just my age. And that's why there was no pursuit for her.
And then to know that he knew all that, and he was deliberately doing something that was affecting, that part of our life. And so that was really devastating to me, that I felt like there wasn't any care or concern for me. I felt really betrayed.
I really honestly thought that I was going to be able to handle it on my own and control it, and to stop viewing it. Unfortunately, that was not the case.
So I wanted to break in real quick just to kind of talk to people who might not have a Christian worldview. I'm a Christian, but I do understand that there are many of you who watch and you are not. And I don't want my content to be alienating to you in any way. I really believe that what Jessica is talking about today, though, really applies to us all, whether you are of the Christian faith or whether you're not. So I just want to encourage you, as you continue to watch my videos, as you continue to engage in this content, to open up your ears and open up your heart and really listen to what she has to say. Let's join back in. So you were talking a little bit earlier, Jessica, about intimacy. And, I always say that intimacy is not sex, right? You can have a relationship with someone and be intimate. I mean, we see this with the parent-child relationship.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
you see this with even good friendships. So intimacy should be the goal, would you say? And sex just
Absolutely.
helps to fulfill that?
Absolutely. So sex is a form of intimacy, but we have a lot of different types of intimacy we can have. The other major problem with it is really in relationship when you're married, the two of you age slowly over time, and you watch that together. Women's bodies change drastically after they have kids. Just in general, as life goes on, our bodies change, our perspectives on life change, our belief systems sometimes change, we grow, we mature, and that's a good thing, and our sexuality actually grows with it too. And that's why you can have a young couple 20 years old that look at each other and think, you're so gorgeous and I love you, and then that same couple, if they maintain their relationship in their 80s, can still look at each other and say, you're so gorgeous, I love you.
So sweet.
And we want that,
Yeah.
but pornography teaches you, I have the look I want when I want it, and no matter how old I get, I can find that exact picture I want, and I can change it at my every whim, and I can look at what I want to when I want to, and you'll never have somebody who can match that,
Right.
because we change over time.
Because 60-year-olds are not doing porn videos. You know,
Actually,
60-year-old
they may
women.
be.
Oh, I don't know. I would not want to see that. You know, but I get the selfish part, because if you're a 60-year-old man and here you are, you built this life with this 60-year-old woman, but you're watching a 23-year-old. I mean, that's just not even fair. You know, it's not even a fair comparison. So I'm so glad that you brought up the porn thing. I think that's kind of one of those tricky, deceitful tactics that can be kind of thrown in there, like, hey, this is going to help you enhance what you have, but in all actuality, it really is going to destroy what you have. So we work with a lot of married couples, and you know, I think that there's a big difference between intimacy and sex. So why don't you talk to us about what that difference actually is?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you say that, because sometimes people do get that confused and they think, well, if we're having enough sex, then clearly we're intimate. But that's not necessarily the truth. So I like to describe it kind of as 3 different types of intimacy. And I take this actually from the Greek words for love. So we've got eros, which would be the sexual intimacy, agape, and phileo. And so the phileo is that friendship piece. And actually, we've got to have that to have an intimate marriage. So that's the, you know, I actually want to hang out with you. That's the, I enjoy time with you. That's the, I can tell you my secrets and my fears and my anxieties and my hopes and dreams. Like, you got to have that to have a strong marriage. The other part of that agape love, is incredibly important too. So agape love says, when you're annoying in the mornings and I need you to be quiet while I get ready for work, I'm still going to love you. Agape says, even though our personality differences clash sometimes, I still choose to treat you with respect and with kindness because I care about you deeply. Agape says, even if you've hurt me, I forgive you, and I am committed to staying in this relationship and working through those pains. And then you have the eros. So eros absolutely includes sexuality. So that's, you know, that's the physical attraction. My husband works out. That's great.
You're like, thank you, Jesus.
Thank you, Jesus.
I love to look at that.
For good, strong muscle structure. So the eros includes like the physical attraction, it includes the sexual relationship, and then it includes all those person-to-person contact that's deeper than what you would do with friends at church. So it does include the long hugs with your spouse, the rubbing one another's legs while you sit on while you sit and watch TV. It's holding hands. It's the hand on the back as you walk out the door. Like, it's all these little gestures of kindness and love that you show to your spouse. And you've got to have all 3 of those, and one isn't more important than the rest. You've got to have all of them to really have an intimate relationship. So by sex definitely should be intimate. It is a piece of intimacy, not the entire picture of intimacy.
That's so good. But what you're not saying just focus on these other 2, and if you're not having sex, it's okay. You're saying you need to still be having sex, but make sure that you're also focusing on these others.
Absolutely.
I think that is probably the best explanation of those 3 kinds of love that I've ever heard.
Thanks.
Especially you think about agape love, and what we've been taught in most churches is that agape is God-like love, and then it skips on. But we can show God-like love with the compassion, with the unconditional love, with the, I believe in you, even when you don't believe in yourself. So that's so good. That's so good, Jessica.
And it's really important to know that you do need all 3 of those pieces. So, I always tell couples, in fact, one of the first things we do when couples come in, that's your session 1 or part 2, we're going to talk about those concepts actually, because typically when a couple comes to see me, there's something missing there, and it's almost never just one piece. So in fact, I can't think of a single couple that's ever come in and said, well, it's just our sex lives, you know, we're having this one particular issue, but if we work on this, we should be good. I've had them say that, but as we talk, we realize actually that's not true. And in fact, usually the sexual relationship is really just a reflection of the rest of their relationship in general. So couples that are mean and ugly and name calling to one another during conflict, they're probably doing some of that about sexuality as well, and talking about where you don't meet my needs and you need to change. So sexuality is a huge picture of how intimate we are. And yes, couples should be having sex, but that's only one piece of it. And you even mentioned it in your sexless marriage video that sometimes there are things that happen where couples can't have sex. So maybe there's been some kind of major medical issue or concern, and we're definitely not talking about that here, that you gotta, you know, suck it up and make it happen anyway.
Push through anyway. You sit in that wheelchair and make it happen.
Right, you said I do. So we're not talking about that. We're talking in general healthy relationships that want to have the fullness of Christ in their relationship. That's a part of it. He gave us sex to bond us, and it's a beautiful picture of his creative glory and kindness and goodness. So it should be an aim in your marriage. So we're definitely not discounting it. It just can't be the only aim, or you're going to end up really unsatisfied.
And I think this is what differentiates you and other Christian sex therapists from secular therapists. I, believe it or not, and you may have heard of this, I have a news feed that I look at in the mornings, and now they're talking about these sex robots.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Yes,
I was like,
do know.
What is happening in our world? What in the world? What is a sex robot?
Well, that was a really long article, it was a really long article, right? And it was telling you how it was going to enhance your relationship, because now you could have this robot instead of having an affair. But if your spouse didn't want to have sex, that's okay, because you have this robot. First of all, like, that could be highly dangerous, I would think, and there could be all kinds of glitches that could just be horrible.
Goodness.
So that could be a problem anyways. But you know, the sex robot is not that different from pornography, right? So pornography puts somebody in front of you, and you look at that picture, and then you get to do your sexuality however you want. So again, selfish. A sex robot would be the same thing. So when you invite that into your house, you're basically saying, so I don't need person-to-person contact anymore. I'm okay if my spouse never comes around. In fact, I know of couples who they only see each other on the weekends, live in different states, and have completely separate lives. Well, when that happens, what you're basically saying is, I don't need an actual oneness relationship. I'm not going there with you, but I do like to have you around sometimes when it feels good for me. And that's not marriage. Marriage requires a level of sacrifice, and sexuality does too. Like, it requires a level of sacrifice in the sense that there might be times when you're not feeling that intimate, but you love your spouse and you care for your spouse and you do want to be intimate. So you say, let's set aside this time, even if you're not necessarily feeling it. But to let some kind of robot or pornography or anything, or even just self-care in that area, masturbation, where it becomes all about you instead of the person-to-person contact, you're absolutely not seeing sex for what it's supposed to be.
Yeah. And I just think about, I think as humans, we always have the temptation to forego the authentic for the quick fix, right? It is incredibly difficult to build an intimate, long-lasting, sustainable marriage. It takes, you have to die to yourself every day, and I feel like when people do things like porn or the sex robot or masturbation or whatever it is, it's basically saying, I want a fraction, I want to basically be able to extract out of that intimacy what I want, but I don't want to do the work to get the rest of it. And I feel like that's such a problem in marriages, is that, when we're talking about what constitutes great sex, right? And so usually when people say, oh, that was really great, it's all technique. It was, this person did this, or even if you think of like your pre-marriage days, if you were having sex outside of marriage and, maybe that person satisfied you in a particular way. But to me, great sex isn't necessarily technique. It's the bond. It's the love and care and concern and that, I think that is what sets marriage apart, is that you don't just have the technique, you don't just have the sexual act, but you've got like this whole foundational relationship that you can draw from that just makes it so great.
That's so true. And really, even in sexuality, so, Technique sometimes comes into play. So as a sex therapist, there are times when we're talking technique. So if you have pain, there are things you can do to try to alleviate some of that pain. And if you're having difficulty orgasming, there are things you can do to help with that. And there are things to help even with physical problems like erectile dysfunction or ejaculation issues. So sometimes education and technique really does play a role. Pregnancy, if you still want to be intimate but you're finding it's hard to move your body in the right ways, like technique can play a role, but it is absolutely not the entire piece of sex or what makes great sex. Part of what makes sex so great is because you have formed such a tight relationship with that person that sex is beyond what it feels like in the moment. Like in the moment, that's great, right? And you have that fun and that enjoyment, and then beyond that moment, you have this entire life together where you can both just celebrate the fact that like we are one, like physically and emotionally and spiritually, we're together in this journey, and that's a beautiful picture of what sex really should be. So way beyond the orgasm, it's about we have bonded and we're close together today and right now, and not just right now, but always. And that's really what sex is supposed to be.
Absolutely. It's like the glue, that bonds. And I think that I remember when I was maybe like 6th or 7th grade, we had this speaker that came into one of our chapels. I was going to a Christian school, or maybe it wasn't 6th grade, maybe it was a little bit earlier than that. Anyway, we had the speaker that came in and they gave us these little sheets of paper and they put glue on this construction. Have you seen this? And they put the glue on the construction paper and they sealed them together and they told us to rub them. And then they were like, all right, now rip your paper apart. And so like if I have a green piece of paper and a pink piece of paper and I rip them apart, there's pieces that are on each, because that is what sex is supposed to be meant for. And that stuck in my mind. As a little kid, I remember thinking, I'm not going to be out here having sex with everybody because I don't want everybody's pieces on me. And I feel like when we're talking about soul ties, and this is like a whole nother conversation, but we talk about soul ties from people who have been in multiple sexual relationships and they can't seem to move forward in their lives, or maybe you've been broken up with someone for 7 or 8 years and you're constantly thinking about that person and you just can't seem to get over them. It's because they've bonded with that person. And so what happens is then you get married and you bring all that baggage into your relationship. And I really feel like, Jessica, this is why God says don't have sex outside of marriage. It's not because he's trying to hold something from us, like this is really good and you can't have it because you're not married, but it's because he knows the emotional effects that it has on us and the brokenness that we invite into our own lives when we decide to do our own thing.
Yeah, I agree with you. So, God created marriage, and we see that with Adam and Eve, right? He made two individuals, they came together, and they were supposed to stay together. And the beauty behind that is he gives us really a picture of what it looks like to be united with him. And so had humanity done it well, which none of us would, right?
Oopsie,
but had they done it well, that would be really just a reflection of what we have with Christ. And so you can't talk about sex, you can't talk about intimacy without talking about God. Not only is he the creator, but by its very nature of sexual intimacy, it's actually God reflective. So seeing intimacy for what it's supposed to be, a uniting of souls, is really what God tries to show us. He wants us to be united to him. Now, that's just a picture, right? That's not what it looks like to be united to Christ, but it's a picture. And when you're having an intimate relationship that's way more than just the orgasm, when you're having an intimate connection, you can get little glimpses of that sometimes where you say, this is what it's supposed to be like. Like, this is an actual uniting. You love me even though you know me. Like, you know my weaknesses, my frailties, the place where I'm a punk, and you love me anyways. And that's really the way God sees us. And so when we do it right, we can get these little pictures of seeing one another the way that God sees us. And it's magnificent, it's mind-blowing, and it's beautiful to realize that sex can be a reflection of who God is.
It's so good. So tell us, if you had to say, like, maybe your best piece of advice for a couple that's struggling in this way. I know you've got so much knowledge in your brain, but what would you say? How can they start on the path to freedom and restoration?
Sometimes it's really couple specific, so it might depend on why the reasons for maybe the disconnect is there. But I would say probably the biggest maybe umbrella view of sex and trying to really enjoy that and enjoy the connection is starting to get a big picture view of sex. So most of us have this little picture view, right? We've talked about a little pornography. It's about me. If it feels good for me, then I like it. And so we have this little picture view of sex instead of the bigger picture view of really what God designed it for. He knew what he was doing. He created our bodies. He knew how we were going to use them. We did not come up with that on our own. Like, this is very much God's plan and design. But the bigger picture of that really is about knowing him more and understanding even just the creative aspects of who God is, his tender loving kindness, just to be able to give us something that would bond us and be fun, because he didn't have to do that. You can bond with a girlfriend over coffee and it's fun.
Right.
But it's not that kind of fun.
Right.
Because there's only one way to do that, and that's God giving that to us through sex. And so part of this really is just about seeing this bigger picture of who God is through sexuality. And there's a couple of resources I really love for that. So one of them is Paul David Tripp's Sex in a Broken World. Specifically, it actually talks about little picture versus big picture sex, so it's really great. And then Celebration of Sex by Dr. Doug Rosanell is really great, and it talks also about how we can start getting this understanding. And sometimes our theology has messed that up a little bit for messages we heard in church or growing up, but he talks about how to really see sex as a celebration and as a gift from God. And so those would be the two resources I would recommend.
Thank you. And I'll make sure for the podcast, we'll put those on the show notes, and for those watching on video, that we'll put those, we'll have links to those resources at the bottom. So Jessica, how can my viewers and listeners find out more about you?
Well, thank you for asking.
Yes.
So you can find me online at befully.well.com. So that's 3 words, befully.well.com.
Okay.
So you can find me there. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. And I have a YouTube channel, so you can find me all over the web. And those concepts I was talking about, actually, about those 3 loves, that's actually a free guide on my website that you can download to get a little bit more information, actually how to increase the love in each of those 3 different areas.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. So I just want to let you all know that this is something that is super important to your marriage, and even for the singles that are watching. Maybe you haven't gotten married yet, but you want to start your marriage off on the right foot. You want to make sure that if there's any sexual brokenness in your life, that you've gone ahead and addressed that before you get married, and that you also find someone who's addressed their own areas of sexual brokenness. I think I love what you said earlier, is that, we live in a fallen world, and none of us are going to ever attain the level of perfection. But I think this is something that we have to talk about in our marriage. I think it's an absolutely courageous conversation that we can have with your spouse. I know that there are things that I've been married for 19 years, and really there probably in the last couple of years, there's some things that I have just started talking about with Sean, even though I feel like we're really close. And so just because your spouse hasn't told you in the past that there's something that may have happened to them as a child doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. So hopefully this conversation will help us all to walk in greater levels of compassion and care and concern for each other. I think the thing that keeps kind of resounding in my ear is that sex is supposed to be mutually beneficial.
Absolutely.
It's not just one person getting theirs and being like, peace out, thanks, thanks so much. But it's supposed to be something that is mutually beneficial, that can actually unite soul to soul, and that's really what the true definition of intimacy is.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So this has been great, Jessica. Thank you so much. And for those of you all, be sure that you are following the Real Relationship Talk show. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram, and also on YouTube. And we'll see you on the next video. Take care.